This
colleagues.
conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, dear industry colleagues and respected speakers. A hearty welcome to all of you to today's web seminar on the emerging picture on privacy and data protection in India, organized by the German Engineering Federation VDMA with Cyril Amachand Mangaldas. We hope all of your family and colleagues are safe and doing well. I'm Jam, based out of the Mumbai office of VDMA, and I'll be taking you through the session today. Before we continue, I would like to remind all of you that for optimal viewing experience, kindly select the active camera mode. Please turn off or mute your microphones and kindly post your questions in the chat box. So you could continue to post your questions during the entire session, and they'll be taken up during the last leg of the seminar. With the advent of digitization, it has become increasingly important to safeguard citizens' privacy, particularly regarding third-party access to data. Data protection privacy is a very sensitive topic and something which has been coming up recently because of the constant ways in which every user has been targeted with ads for using social media platforms online. The user's information has been a mere visiting card to exchange between companies without their knowledge to constantly keep them in hinge. The Personal Data Protection Bill 2019, which was introduced by the Ministry of Electronics and Information in Parliament on the 11th of December 2019, sets out to align India's data protection regime with EU's GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, by protecting citizens' data as well as the cross-border flow of data. It also creates Data Protection Authority, DPA, which is interested with regulating the interests of individuals pertaining to data protection. Presently, there are 100 million internet users in India. This figure is projected to grow to 974 million users by 2025. In fact, India was ranked as the second largest online market worldwide in 2019, coming only second to China. In the people knowingly or unknowingly share sensitive personal data on various digital platforms such as e-commerce sites, mobile apps, net banking, e-wallets, etc. The users of these platforms give permission to use their personal data by simply ticking on the I agree with the terms and conditions without reading the privacy. This security vulnerability leaves millions of users susceptible to hackers and various threat actors. As per the Union Communications Ministry, the government is very keen to promote India as a very big center of the data economy and would like to finalize a data protection law very soon. Data is going to drive the digital economy. It is going to drive international commerce. India produces huge amounts of digital ecosystem through mobile phones and Aadhaar. India is waiting for this movement for data economy, data innovation, and data refinery. During the pandemic, the communication sector witnessed a growth of around 7% and also received significant investments from major global companies. As we are aware, the global manufacturing world was looking towards alternative destinations. In view of India's enormous success in mobile manufacturing, India came up with a big idea of production-linked incentive scheme. The major global economies, including from India, have committed to invest close to 11 lakh crore in the next 5 years and propose to manufacture mobiles and components, out of which 7 lakh crore would be only for exports. During the pandemic, the government has got Apple to shift 9 of its operating units and their components from China to India, which will cater to both the domestic and the export market. The pandemic, of course, has created a lot of problems, but the digital ecosystem gave the opportunity. For the government, the approach to artificial intelligence is to lead to inclusion and empowerment of the ordinary citizens. Next slide. VDMA, the Mechanical Engineering Industry Association, was founded in November 1892 and is the most important voice for the mechanical engineering industry. VDMA represents around 3,300 mostly medium-sized companies, making it the largest industry association in Europe. Its members currently contribute to 78% as exports, which is equivalent to 232 billion euro production. Recognizing the very early significance of India as a future market for the member companies, India was one of the first offices amongst the BRIC countries. VDMA stands to be the only German industrial association having well-established offices in India since several years, with their offices presently located in Noida, Kolkata, Mumbai, and Bangalore. Next slide. We are pleased to welcome our eminent speakers from Cyril Amachand Mangaldas for today's web seminar. We will begin with a short address from Ms. Priti Shah, and this will be followed by the presentation from Mr. Arun Prabhu, who will give us the overview on the existing regulatory regime in India and the forthcoming legislations. My colleague, Mr. S. Manohar, who's the regional head for the Southern region, would also moderate the session and the Q&A. Next slide. Smriti specializes in foreign investments into India, public and private mergers and acquisitions, joint venture, and the SEBI takeover regulations. She has advised top-tier Indian as well as foreign companies, private equity players, and their promoters, and understands the deal dynamics from the investors and targeters' perspective. She's a co-member of the firm's German desk, and she's also a qualified company secretary. Next slide. Arun Prabhu has been ranked as an upcoming lawyer by the Chambers and Partners in 2020 and as a notable practitioner by IFLR 2021. Arun advises extensively on India's evolving data protection and privacy regime. He has helped leading companies evolve their legal standard operating procedures and best practices around data collection, processing, aggregation, retention, breach and transfer, and privacy policies and security practices in a rapidly changing legal environment. With no further delay, I'd like to hand it over to you, Smriti and Arun. Thank you.
Am I audible?
Yes, Smriti, you are. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending this webinar. We're very pleased to be associated with BDMA and present this topic to you. Just a brief introduction to our firm. Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas is one of the largest firms in India with an over 100-year legacy. We are the largest firm in India with offices in Mumbai, Bangalore, New Delhi, and Ahmedabad. It's a top-tier law firm with more than 750 lawyers, and we have the entire gamut of services in corporate law for India. So it includes corporate law, projects, financing, capital markets, and also certain practices like data privacy, which Arun heads, and other services. We have a specialized German desk, given the wide range of investments that come from Germany, which is basically from listed German entities as well as Mittelstand companies. It's a pleasure for our firm to be associated with BDMA, and we hope that this webinar gives you a brief insight into the topic. So over to you, Arun.
Thanks very much, Smriti. Thank you, everyone, for your time and being part of this presentation. While the intent is to obviously keep this interactive, I will try and broadly follow the script. We have kept aside a significant chunk of time towards the end for discussions. Before I move on to sort of the meat and potatoes of this, I will just broadly set some context and talk about what we focus on and what we won't. Where the intent of this session is to give you an introduction to the current and the emerging picture on data privacy and protection, with focus around a corporate audience. There are many important issues that affect us as individuals around the subject matter of privacy and data protection. It's a subject matter that's very close to our heart. Every time there is a large data breach, especially on the consumer-facing side, we often see this as a primary source of concern for us. We tend to worry about it. But again, the focus here is to look at how this will affect corporates, and particularly corporates with European or German origins working out of India, or with connections with Germany working out of India, and how the regime will impact them. There's also a very important piece of this puzzle that deals with civil society and how civil society will be impacted by this surveillance, the powers of the state. These are again issues we will not deal with in great detail here, just given that we have a certain amount of time. If something is not clear or not comprehensible, please do feel free to put this into the chat window or the chat box. Manor, I'm getting something in the chat box around myself not being audible. I know this worked fine when we were doing the presentation, so please let me know if you hear an issue, or whether this is just a bad internet connection at the recipient end.
No, you're perfectly fine. The problem was when Jamli was speaking, I think she was getting a bit distracted. Now you're perfectly fine. Don't worry. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you so much. I will start off. Next slide, please. Great. As you may know, sorry, next slide. As you may know, there are existing laws around data protection and privacy in India. This is not an empty space. While the enforcement of these laws and the way in which they are interpreted by people is often more sort of in the breach than in compliance, the fact remains that the law still exists. Next slide, please. Sorry. Thank you. So the existing law on the point is broadly contained in the Information Technology Act. This is obviously a fairly restricted regime. This Information Technology Act protects what is called as sensitive personal data and information. It covers other information like personal, which is classified broadly as personal information. We'll get into these definitions shortly. But effectively, the substantive coverage or the substantive protection that is available is largely on this narrower category of what we call sensitive personal data. And then there are these rules called the Information Technology Reasonable Security Practices and Procedures rules, which actually put out various obligations in relation to how this information has to be dealt with. So firstly, we start with this very narrow sort of coverage. Second, you have rules which basically penalize you only if there is an actual data breach and this has resulted in wrongful harm or wrongful loss or wrongful gain to someone. Third, you have an enforcement mechanism which has largely been defunct over the last few years. This entire in 2011, just before these rules came out, I was standing in the middle of this conference where nobody had any idea these rules were coming out. This was a conference of technology lawyers, and then everybody started looking at their phones and say, "Oh, these rules are out." There was no consultation. The rules had spelling mistakes in them when they were first put out, and so on and so forth. So it's a regime that's not very well evolved. Although the government of India did make arguments for a very long time that this regime is adequate, there was obviously a recognition that this general regime governing personal data is somewhat inadequate as it stands. And then there are sectoral regulations around this. These sectoral regulations apply to people in specific sectors. So for instance, if you operate what is called as a payment and settlement system, so whether you're a credit card company, you're a bank, you're a financial services institution, obviously you're subject to specific information security requirements. The Reserve Bank of India, the IRDA, and there are several other sector regulators which have specific rules around this. You will notice these rules become more and more common as the importance of data, as Jamli put very well in her sort of introduction to this. As the importance of data is recognized more broadly, you will see more sector-specific regulation, and the sector-specific regulation happens immediately. So, for instance, this payment and settlement system business went from concept to actual implementation within months. And unlike the data protection bill, which has been negotiated and discussed for the longest time in public society, this comes fairly immediately. So to the extent you're in a regulated sector, to the extent you have a sector regulator, you require licensing, you require approval, telecom, financial services, banking, insurance, healthcare. All of these are sectors where we are seeing sector-specific regulation, and those regulations often leapfrog the general data protection law. Happy to have conversations around that separately, but our focus here will largely be on general data protection. And then we come to our Supreme Court and the constitutional rights. Unlike current circumstances where we're sort of left with a bit of a mixed bag, in terms of the decisions coming out of that forum, we have in 2017, as you may all recall, there was a significant amount of debate in terms of civil society around the right to privacy and the existence of this framework called Aadhaar. Aadhaar started off as a form of unique identification. It was intended to be a means of identifying people. It was supposed to be biometric enabled. It was supposed to help a lot of government schemes function, in a certain manner. There was obviously, given that it's biometric in nature, given the broad range of data collection that was contemplated, I think fundamentally, this was obviously ripe for challenge around privacy, and the constitutional validity of some of the Aadhaar provisions were challenged. In that challenge, the government of India argued that there was no constitutional right to privacy. There was only a legal right to privacy, and that obviously by legislation the government could, fetter this right to privacy in some manner. And then in what was, as a privacy lawyer, for me at least, a glorious decision, a 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court analyzed the provisions of the Constitution of India, analyzed the provisions of various other legislations, and eventually determined that there was a fundamental constitutional right to privacy, which all Indian citizens enjoy as part of their right to life. And as part of that, they put down certain interesting pronouncements. So that's the other piece of law which occupies this space. And next slide, please. So what happened while this entire point was getting sort of discussed and debated at the Supreme Court, obviously. So as we know, the Supreme Court often does one of two things. When it feels that a particular area needs legislation, it often requires the government to pass legislation on the point, or sometimes it in judicial pronouncements creates judge-made law. Now, in this case, the government of India indicated to the Supreme Court that a committee of experts had been formed to draft comprehensive legislation around this issue. A committee with headed by the eminent Justice Sri Krishna was formed to come up with this law. And that committee, within the period of about a year, conducted extensive consultations, discussions, and on the basis of that, put out a draft bill in 2018, along with a report. That document still makes for very interesting reading. It often examines, for instance, the balance that had to be found between convenience and practicality and compliance with the highest possible legal standard in terms of determining matters. And then while doing so, this committee put out legislation which, if you look at it from the right angle and you sort of squint at it right, resembles largely the personal data protection regime in Europe, which all of you having sort of relationships with German entities will be familiar with under the GDPR. Obviously, there are significant and material differences between the GDPR and the data protection bill as put out by the committee. Some of these I will go into, and some of these we can deal with as we go along. And there's obviously a very fundamental difference between the circumstances and the manner in which legislation is enacted, it is interpreted, and it is implemented in both these sets of jurisdictions. So while there are similarities to the GDPR, one of the matters of caution I like to start off with is to say it's not the same thing, and that there is some nuance there that needs to be looked at. I think the next stage in this sort of process of evolution was in December of 2019. After nearly more than a year after the committee put out its report, the government of India finally put this bill before Parliament. And while it put it before Parliament, obviously there were conversations, there were significant changes which had been made to the draft that the committee had put out. Justice Sri Krishna, in his own sort of inimitable style, has made his views on the changes very clear for those of you who follow this space. But eventually, what is partisan and bicameral, so essentially, applicable both across, for both houses of Parliament and across party lines to examine this bill and propose modifications or to propose changes to it. This committee has been holding consultations of late, and those consultations have been a significant part of the news cycle. The committee's role has grown from examining the existing legislation. They have called representatives of several parts of industry. They have heard representations from several people. We have been helping clients make submissions and make representations to this committee. And this committee is proposed to put out its report to Parliament in the budget session. Obviously, circumstances surrounding COVID have affected matters, and it's supposed to put out a report to Parliament in the next session of Parliament, and presumably we will then move to enactment. Fundamentally, this bill proposes a drastic sea change in how data is dealt with in India. It will cover all processing of personal data. I will be using these terms fairly often and we'll just get to the definition, but basically processing will include all things that involve data. So for instance, whether you collect it, you store it, you organize it, you structure it, you adapt it, you transmit it, you send it, disclose it, access it, or even delete it. All of these are acts of processing. And therefore it will cover all processing of personal data within India. It will cover all processing of personal data by Indian entities, and it will cover all processing of personal data outside India if it is in connection with conducting business in India or profiling people in India. There are discussions that the committee is proposing to extend portions of this bill beyond the processing of personal data to the processing of certain types of non-personal data. There's already one little provision in the version that is currently being contemplated by Parliament, which enables the government of India to require people to provide it with non-personal data or anonymized personal data on demand. But again, that's not clear. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. We have enough to consider based on what's actually out there on record. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Some fundamental concepts which we need to look at. For those of you who speak GDPR, you need to get used to certain changes. And those fundamental changes are that the concept of what in Europe you call a data controller is here called a data fiduciary. What you in Europe call a data subject is here called a data principal. Now, this is not just this is not just a nomenclature issue. This comes from a fundamental principle under India data protection legislation or the proposed PDP bill, which differs, or at least in some manner differs from what the GDPR says. And this fundamental difference really here is that in India, the person who is processing the data is considered to be processing it in trust for the person to whom the data belongs. So there is a fiduciary relationship, which is a relationship of trust that is inferred under, or proposed to be inferred at least under Indian law, between the owner of the data, or not the owner, sorry, the person to whom the data belongs and the person who is processing that data. So this is a higher standard than the GDPR. It brings potentially unique challenges in terms of how this will be interpreted and enabled, and fundamentally moves this from a relationship of contract or a relationship of statute to a relationship of trust. And it will obviously influence how courts examine obligations when entities are collecting and processing data. So all entities which process the data will be, which collect and process the data will be called data fiduciaries, people to whom that data belongs. And these people can only be natural persons, which is human beings, will be data principals. Couple more concepts. If you are processing data on behalf of somebody, for instance, you have a parent company, you have a services agreement with that parent company is sending you data of its customers and you are processing that data on behalf of that parent company, then you are what you may be classified as what is called a data processor. This concept is the same as it is in the GDPR, effectively somebody who is processing data under contract or on basis of on behalf of somebody and is not processing the data on their own behalf. So that's the concept of data processor. And then there's the concept of a significant data fiduciary, which is relevant in India, which basically applies where there's a bunch where if you're in the business of processing data, if you have large volumes of data which you collect and process, that data happens to be sensitive, you have a significant turnover of materiality, and the processing of the data or its leakage can lead to significant harm, you run the risk of being classified as what is called a significant data fiduciary. a significant data fiduciary will have additional obligations under law, which we will deal with later. Before we move on from the slide, I just want to deal with 3 more very quick definitions. So fundamentally, data protection legislation, or privacy legislation at least, deals with what is called personal data. Data which relates to a natural person, like I said, a human being, which is capable of indirectly or directly identifying the person, either on its own or in combination with other data, either offline or online, including inferences. Please note, everything I'm saying in this session is not a word for word copy from what's in the statute. I am interpreting and simplifying concepts given the nature of this conversation. Happy to have more targeted conversations around specific language in the statute to the extent necessary. So fundamentally, if it can identify you, or it relates to you, or it's an inference about you, and you are a human being or a natural person, it will constitute personal data. Within this category of personal data, there's another category called sensitive personal data. Sensitive personal data includes financial data, health data, biometric information, genetics, gender, sex life, religious or political beliefs, caste, tribe, etc., etc. Lastly, there is a category called critical personal data. That's not yet defined. It can be defined by the government. I'll tell you what the consequences of that are as well. Next slide, please. What are the fundamental obligations around? So what's the consequence of collecting and processing personal data? If I have to summarize the obligations under the Data Protection Act in a sentence, the obligation is that you will collect, store, and process personal data in a fair and reasonable manner in accordance with the consent of a user, largely for the purpose for which it has been collected, only till such time as that purpose is relevant. You will keep this data accurate and relevant. You will take standard measures to protect this data, and you will notify breaches. That, in a few sentences, is a brief and crisp summary of your obligations under this legislation. Of course, the devil, as we spoke, is in the details, and I'll be getting into this in more detail in the slides to come. But largely, and I'll repeat again, if you hear absolutely nothing else through this whole presentation, wherever you collect data relating to a natural person, you are required to collect, store, or process that data fairly, reasonably, in accordance with a process, in accordance with a consent for the purpose consented to or a related purpose, and consequently you are required to keep this data accurate, only keep it for the period you require it, and notify breaches. Those are the broad sort of obligations that come out of this legislation. Fundamentally, that means, sorry, we can move to the next slide. Fundamentally, that means that you cannot collect or process data for the large part as a corporate entity without consent. There are other forms of processing which are permitted without consent. We will get into those forms, but those forms are largely enabling very limited kinds of reasonable exceptions. Those exceptions are narrower than they are in Europe. And as far as India is concerned, you're largely going to be focused on what is called a consent-based regime. Consent has to be taken clearly on the basis of a clear consent notice. That consent notice must be concise and comprehensible. The consent must be free, it must be informed, it must be specific. Most importantly, consent is always capable of being withdrawn. For certain kinds of data, consent has to be explicit and granular. Sorry. And this consent, so effectively what this has done is to move us from an economy where we say more data is good, where we say our response to any form of data collection is to say yes please, where everybody from an apartment mall entrance to somebody who's delivering your groceries wants your name and phone number and photograph and so on and so forth, to an economy hopefully where number one, they can only collect, store and use this data for purposes which you have clearly consented to, and where you will have the ability to withdraw that consent from whenever you want to. Purpose, and of course, most importantly, even if they collect data from you, that data can only be used for the purpose for which it was collected, or for a purpose that was incidental or ancillary to it. Therefore, if someone is collecting data from you to give you, say, to allow you access to their premises, they cannot use that data later to market things to you. If someone is collecting your data to provide you with healthcare, they cannot use that data unless you have expressly consented to it for the purposes of selling you insurance. Next slide, please. Like I said, there are some limited exceptions to the consent-based principle. You can, as the state, process it for several other things: law and order, legal orders, medical emergencies. And this is important. As an employer, you can process data for the purposes related to your employment. Some of these process purposes include recruitment, termination, provision of benefits, verifying attendance, performance evaluation, etc. However, the purpose for which an employee, the employer can only use employment as a basis for processing in circumstances where consent is not reasonable. Therefore, if you have a touch point with the user, if you have the ability to get them to sign off on a consent, please go ahead and use that option. Do not use this unless you're talking about large data sets or circumstances such as surveillance, where consent is not practical or reasonable. Other exceptions, which include research, archiving, statistical purposes. There is also another set of reasonable purposes which is currently positive. These reasonable purposes, unlike everywhere else in the world, do not apply automatically. They have to be put out by the Data Protection Authority. This includes fraud prevention, credit scoring, debt recovery, whistleblowing, mergers, network and information security, processing of publicly available information, and the operation of search engines. All of these will be fleshed out and dealt with in more detail by the Data Protection Authority. Next slide, please. Fundamentally, this is a regime which is intended to provide rights to the data principle. The data principle is required to provide, is required to be provided certain rights. Like I mentioned, apart from, of course, the right to consent to their data, they have the right to access their data. So whenever they require this data, do remember, and for those of you who have operated in Europe, a lot of the activism and a lot of the evolution of the law around data protection and privacy has occurred due to data principle activism. Unlike today, where the data principles in India do not really have a clear method to enforce their rights, there are clear and tangible rights which are being prescribed under the new legislation. So your users and your data principals, be they current or ex-employees, be they customers, be they counterparties, be they vendors, will be important stakeholders in ensuring the privacy of their data. And some of the rights that they have include the ability to process, to get their data. So basically, they can ask you, what data about me do you have? You must be able to provide that in a clear, concise manner. They have the ability to correct their data. So for instance, if you've got an error, they have the ability to correct it. They have a right to portability. So when it's in, when they want to extract data from you and go give it to somebody else, they have the ability to seek data from you for that purpose. They have the ability to seek erasure. There are two separate areas on erasure. The first really is around an automatic eraser where you have the ability to ask the data principal to go back and say, please erase my data, the data fiduciary to go back and say, please erase my data. And then as a data fiduciary, you can decide yes or no. And then they have the ability to go to the regulator and say, this data about me is useless, please ask them to delete it. And then the regulator can say it too. So you have substantial obligations under both, and therefore a mechanism is fundamentally required around ensuring the erasure of information. All of these rights have to be enabled by people who are collecting and processing it. As we learned in Europe, as the GDPR came into force, around the right to be forgotten, these are significant material costs. They include human interaction, they include infrastructure costs, and all of these are obviously expenses that have to be incurred. So data principals, data fiduciaries, as part of the recommendation, should look at what they need to do to enable some of these. Next slide, please. Having sort of gone over some of the high-level highlights, I just want to now go into a couple of concepts which may be relevant from the construct of this specific audience. Like the GDPR, there are obligations or proposed obligations under the Personal Data Protection Bill which restrict the free movement of data between outside India. Localization as a concept is currently heavily debated. It is one of the areas where I personally expect some movement between the version of the bill that is currently sitting before in public domain and the version that is actually going to be enacted. Like I mentioned, data is categorized into personal, sensitive, personal, and critical personal information. As far as the current version of the bill is concerned, there are no restrictions on transfer of personal data. There is a significant argument to be made or being made that this needs to change. The version of the bill which the committee put out required the local storage of some data. Obviously, there have been representations from industry saying this makes things very difficult. And obviously, the Joint Parliamentary Committee is considering this very carefully. Sensitive personal data may only be stored, may only be processed temporarily outside India. A copy always has to be within India, and it can only be transferred pursuant to provisions which are very similar to those under the GDPR. This obviously forms a very important part of the framework for cooperation between India and Europe. As you may be aware, the EU has been notifying countries, including Japan, various other jurisdictions, and examining them for what is called data equivalence or data adequacy, where a state as a whole takes a view that the laws around data protection and privacy are broadly equivalent in another state. They can provide what is called an adequacy decision. That means data can flow freely between these two countries. There have been conversations ongoing between the European Commission, various other member states around an adequacy decision for India. Those conversations were hamstrung by the fact that until 2017, we really did not have broad-based comprehensive data protection legislation. I know there are ongoing conversations around the adequacy of the Personal Data Protection Bill around it, the concerns around Section 35 and state access, the obligations, as we'll see shortly, around Schrems 2 and state surveillance mechanisms. All of these are currently being discussed, and obviously it's an important conversation to have. Absent an adequacy decision, there will be a contractual framework which will need to be entered into, or a scheme framework to be entered into around transfers. This works both. This mechanism will obviously have to be fleshed out, and the adequacy under the Schrems 2 framework and the new standard contractual rules which have been put out by the EU will have to be examined. But as of now, the transfer of sensitive personal data outside India is subject to certain restrictions, and we will need to examine where these restrictions end up. Next slide, please. Some of the other important developments. What is going to be the most important regulator? One of the most powerful regulators with some of the broadest ambit in recent memory is going to be created. It's going to make the Competition Commission look fairly limited in its scope. This will be the Data Protection Authority. It will put out massive quantities of guidance on this legislation. I'm always a fan of saying that we were only seeing 10% of what this legislation will look like. Like in Europe with the Data Protection Board and the various information commissioners of various individual member states, there will be significant guidance which is put out by this Data Protection Authority, and it will be a very, very important regulator. There will be some form of transitional provision before this law comes into force. So even if it's enacted in March, it's not going to immediately come into force in full force. Portions of it will be enacted in a piecemeal manner. There was earlier supposed to be an 18-month timeline from the committee, but that timeline has been removed, so we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. But we're hoping there will be some reasonable period before it's actually active. There is some ambiguity on the treatment of existing data, but the default position, unless there is some sort of clarification which comes out, will be that any ongoing collection, storage, or processing of data collected under existing law today will need to comply with the provisions of the new law as and when it's enacted. So effectively, it means that you will need to go back and fix it in terms of legacy data. So that's obviously something to take away. Like we mentioned, there is a provision around sharing of data with government, where there is the ability to require entities to provide anonymized data on demand. Again, this section was very thin; it wasn't drafted very clearly. It will be interesting to see what eventually gets enacted. Next slide, please. Quick comparison with the GDPR. Obviously, we spoke about the fiduciary relationship. The concept of contract as a basis for processing, which is available under the GDPR, is not available in India. The concept of a legitimate interest, which is required under the GDPR, is not available in India. Reasonable purposes under Indian law are required to be enacted or enabled by the Data Protection Authority. Breach notification is not automatic, and the right to be forgotten is not as clearly fleshed out. And obviously, like I mentioned, we're only seeing 10% of the law. I expect many changes to happen between now and enactment, and I expect the guidance which is put out by the Data Protection Authority to move us even further down that route. Therefore, please resist the temptation to assume that compliance with one form of legislation means compliance with the other. Employment, for instance, is a far more broad basis for processing under the GDPR than it currently looks like under Indian law. So it will be important to analyze this very clearly, basis the law when it's enacted, to take out a position on this. Next slide, please. Like I briefly alluded to earlier, the framework under of sharing data outside Europe has undergone a massive shake-up pursuant to Schrems II. There is obviously, in the absence of an adequacy decision, and there is no adequacy decision with India, transfer has to happen on the basis of standard contractual clauses. The standard contractual clauses require the exporter to take a view on the adequacy of local law, and where adequacy of local law is not automatic, it is required to put in place additional technical measures. Technical measures include anonymization, include either encryption or limited access. These are measures which we are seeing people take in specific contexts. It will be important for you to examine your own standard contractual clauses and determine their adequacy in view of Schrems II and Indian law as it stands today, before you allow for processing or transfer of data under the GDPR from Europe to India. Next slide, please. The sting in the tail is this non-personal data business. Like I mentioned, while the overall framework was in relation to personal data, another committee has been constituted on non-personal data. That committee has examined matters in a substantial amount of detail and come out with some very radical propositions, effectively, which will require the community ownership and sharing of large volumes of data which are currently treated as non-personal. It will be an interesting time for industry, and we recommend that you track that space carefully. Next slide, please. There is obviously going to be a substantial impact on industry. Please, so obviously, the COVID has, processing of data around COVID has been a preview of some of this. While the law was not enforced, we've seen significant challenges and a court striking down some provisions of processing. And effectively, while a public health exception may apply, to the extent the new law is enforced and you still require to process large volumes of health data, and I sincerely hope you won't. But if you do, we'll have to examine how it works. But apart from that, what we're recommending that you do is look at all of your data inflows and outflows, look at your existing data repositories, look at whether this data is sensitive data, personal data, look at your current policies to examine their adequacy in view of the principles that I outlined, check if you get adequate consent from your users and your people, see if you follow the fundamental principles of purpose limitation and data minimization. If you've collected something for a particular purpose, see if you still need it. Get away from the magpie mentality of keeping all of the data that you collect perpetually. All of these are good rules of the road. Next slide, please. Look at your data retention policies. To the extent you don't need data to identify individuals, you just need statistical information or broad data. Look at whether you want to anonymize it. Look at whether your sector regulator or if you as an industry have specific concerns around processing. One classic example of this is search engines. They all got together, went and made representations to Parliament and got a search engine exception put in reasonable purposes. So it is possible to have these conversations, although increasingly less so as the committee proceeds with its deliberations. And generally be more aware of the data that you currently hold and process. I think these are broad sort of rules of the road. Obviously, preparatory work can happen, like those who did during the GDPR process. You can obviously do a lot of preparatory work around data mapping. You can do preparatory work around looking at your existing formats. You can look at examining your repositories and anonymizing them. All of these are exercises that we're doing for multiple clients. It's obviously important to consider whether you're at the right time in your life cycle to be doing that. Next slide, please. It may also be important to determine whether any of your existing data repositories will become subject to mandatory disclosure requirements. To the extent that they are, it may be useful to see if they offer a material competitive advantage. Obviously, if you're going to be acquiring entities in this economy and you're going to be doing mergers and acquisitions, it is very important to do a detailed data protection diligence on what data they hold and make sure that they're not in breach. Because when you inherit data which is non-compliant, you are not inheriting an asset, you're inheriting a potential liability. This has played out in Europe multiple times and it will play out in India as well. Next slide, please. Lastly, just in terms of conclusions, look at the broad obligations that we're considering, see if you want to talk to the committee, track regulations very closely as and when they're notified, and remember that data is going to be a very important part of your regulatory and compliance picture going forward. That's all I had. I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you, Arun. It was an interesting presentation. I'm sure a lot of people, all the people were absorbed in your discussions across, and largely, hopefully, it would be really beneficial for the German community across who were participating, and also the Indian engineering people who were attending this session across. A couple of questions have come online, and it'll be interesting to understand from you your responses to these questions. First, one of the question was India, that is mighty Ministry of Information Technology across, and German BMB conducted a digital dialogue since 2017 to establish joint frameworks on digitalization issues, including data protection, with the PDP bill in focus, where do you see further areas of cooperation with regards to data protection and sovereignty between these two countries? What would be the dialogues that would be taken up?
Like I mentioned, I mean, these conversations have been ongoing for some time. In 2018, I was in Brussels, and part of this conversation where there was a deputation which went from India to examine the possibility of an adequacy decision. And obviously, adequacy is a very important step. And if we do get to adequacy, obviously, this will allow for the free flow of data between India and Europe. It will allow for substantial ease of doing business, especially outsourcing between the countries. But leaving adequacy aside, I think some very important conversations include, harmonization of standards, the adoption of common technical and organizational measures between the two countries, the ability for regulators to cooperate and coordinate in terms of their understanding and decisions. The avoidance of a situation like the Privacy Shield and Schrems 2, where effectively, you have two regulators who just don't get along, and you feel effectively that the overall framework is not working anymore, effectively leaving a whole bunch of users scrambling around what to do in terms of their existing arrangements. So providing a clear roadmap, providing clear predictability, providing clear guidance on what is permissible and what is not, I think will be very important. I'm not very sure as a practical matter that MeitY is the right entity to have this conversation. I feel the Data Protection Authority, when created, along will be the correct entity to have this conversation. MeitY obviously has multiple sort of prerogatives, including enabling manufacturing, the promotion of electronics as a cooperation, the implementation of the telecommunications framework in the country. All of these are obviously imperatives. So perhaps a data-specific conversation between data regulators, like we've seen in the competition space, will be most productive.
Correct. Another question, do all companies need to have sort of DPO or data protection officer? Now, what has happened is, for example, today we have a digital officer across, or a chief digital officer. So currently going forward, do we need a data protection officer or DPOs? Could be, for example, an appointment letter issued to an employee and you're surveilling the person in the office. Should all that be captured or something like that? I mean, just to give you an example across here.
Sure, I think those are multiple questions. Obviously, the legislative standard for the appointment of a data protection officer, like there is in Europe, there's obviously a threshold. The mandatory appointment works at a particular threshold, and then there is a discretionary appointment. So everybody can have one. You obviously need to have somebody in your organization responsible for compliance around data protection and privacy. So you need to have, you already have that under current law, by the way. You need a grievance officer under current law, under the Information Technology Act, and the Allahabad High Court pulled up a bunch of people saying, where is your grievance officer, and passed orders against them as far back as 2016. So these are concepts which are there in existing law. In terms of the data protection officer, if you're a significant data fiduciary, or if you process significant volumes of data, you will need one under law. But you would be well advised to have somebody who fits that designation, if not that qualification, in place upfront. The second part of the question, in terms of sort of employee surveillance and what is permissible and what is not, all of this, Manohar, will be based on a consent-based framework. Employees will need to understand clearly what data relating to them is being collected, how that data is being used, and for what purpose. To the extent that there is general surveillance taking place for the purposes of the prevention of, for employment, for enforcement of employment provisions, for the purposes of reviewing their official correspondence and communications, things like foreign current, FCPA, fraud prevention, compliance, code of conduct. These are all specific purposes that should be enumerated at the time of the taking the consent from the end user. This consent should be kept current. It should be updated for any changes in how you collect and process this data. And effectively, you will need to follow all of these processes before any form of surveillance or interception takes place.
Correct. So connected to the same question, Arun, is who, I mean, you just mentioned a grievance department is currently doing for the data, I mean, for the digital aspect across, or they're currently at the moment. So according to you, who would be the right department or the correct people in the organization who can be adapted or repurposed for this role in the company?
No, so I would think it's going to be a department by itself. I don't think this is going to fly as a sort of you need to build a suit for this.
Okay.
There has to be a fundamental organizational realignment around the concept of privacy by design, which will mean obviously examination of data as a conceptually as a significant source of liability, as a significant source of exposure. The redesign or the reevaluation of IT infrastructure and storage and processing around this framework of realizing privacy is the fundamental driver for it, and therefore the creation of a standalone potential vertical. And I would recommend that it report into the board, focusing around this, because the closest analogy I can give you is around ESG and health and safety, right? Especially for large manufacturing, we saw how that became important, and as things started getting enforced, you saw how this was a separate line item in your board meeting discussions and so on and so forth. More commonly or more recently, you would have seen this happen around anti-bribery and anti-corruption and Sarbanes-Oxley and those concepts. This is going to be something along the same lines. It's not a very high-level conceptual thing that you can say, okay, Mr. Dash, you now have a new sentence on your card and it's your problem. And if somebody writes you an email, be nice to them. You need someone proactively thinking about this, failing which you will see significant exposure and liability.
Okay, so that means a separate functional team which should involve an additional cost to the company in the future across.
Yeah, and that cost is going to pale in comparison with some of the other costs I mentioned, right? Enabling people to access their data, tracking consents, putting in place technical and organizational measures in order to ensure it, privacy by design policy, getting it certified by the Data Protection Authority, having somebody as your data protection officer in order to review grievances and deal with rights to be forgotten requests. These are all significant costs and they will come. Anybody who's lived in Europe in 2018 or managed their business in Europe in 2018 will realize how much cost that entailed. It involved millions and billions of euros of costs in Europe, and even after that, 76% of Europe was non-compliant when the GDPR came into force. So we're in for an interesting time in India once this legislation is in place.
Okay, two separate, probably more related between them. So I thought of asking it together. So for foreign, a lot of German companies have deputations from Europe across working in their organizations. Do we need a separate sort of KYC sort of documents going forward? And second related to the same thing would be moving forward, would there be a lot of disclaimers in all the notices or websites or communication that happen from the organization? Yeah.
So to the extent you have people working on deputation, arguably they will also be protected under this legislation. They're going to be natural persons in India. So that to the extent you're collecting that information and processing it, you'll have to comply with local law. Second, in terms of disclaimers and so on, you should already have disclaimers. The existing law already requires you to have a privacy policy, requires you to have a grievance officer. Fines have been handed out for not complying with these obligations. But we will see that obviously go up a notch because there is a way to enforce it. It's 4% of your relevant global turnover if you don't comply. So people tend to sort of be focused on these things.
Okay. There is another question which mentions that there are a lot of Indians settled abroad. So how would they be connected to these activities across if they are on deputation?
If the processing is not taking place in India, the person is abroad, there's no targeting of that person, and it's being done by an entity outside, they may not have substantial protection under this legislation. That's what I would really think. But to the extent that data makes its way to India and it's being processed in India, they would obviously be covered.
Okay, there is something else which a lot of manufacturing companies would be burdened with this machine data. Let's assume in an organization which is Industry 4.0, they will have a lot of machine data coming, like a sensor data, machine data across. So is this anyway related to the personal PDP activities across? Would there be any categorization of this?
So that's a great question, and it's one that we spend a lot of time thinking about. So a couple of points. Number one, of course, to the extent that this data pertains to a natural person or is able to identify a natural person. So you have facial recognition going in. You have, there are only 3 people who use a room, and you have the ability to distinguish between those 3 people with slightly different body temperatures, and you have a temperature scanner installed in that room. You have machine-to-machine communication around between somebody's Fitbit and somebody's your repository and your server. To the extent that any of this data is capable of identifying a person, regardless of its origin, whether it is machine generated, individually generated, recorded, whatever, it will still be personal data. So that's the first point. The second point is, even if it doesn't identify a natural person, like I mentioned, there is already something which says that the government can ask you to provide data. 2, the committee is considering the regulation of non-personal data through the Personal Data Protection Bill. And 3, perhaps most concerningly, there is this Chris Gopalakrishnan committee and the Non-Personal Data Committee, which has put out some very strong recommendations there too. So those three trends to me indicate that no data is excluded, and all data is going to be looked at in a fair amount of detail, regardless of whether it identifies a natural person or not. But short answer, watch this space. To the extent that it doesn't identify a person, you need to watch the space to determine how the law sort of evolves.
Yeah. One more interesting is, what would be the responsibility of the role of a data principal? You explained a lot across in your presentation across. In 2 lines, what would be I as a data principal would like to keep in mind when this is enforced?
No, so as a data principal, all of your information is being processed by somebody else largely for your benefit or for some other purpose. To the extent you feel your information is not being processed properly, or is being processed without your consent, or a purpose you don't approve of, or if that processing has resulted in adverse consequences to you, or if there has been a breach of your information, you now have a valid and tangible set of rights, at least against private persons, which you can enforce. Like I said, I'm not drifting into the government side of things, but at least from a private industry perspective, you have strong rights and you have the ability to enforce them. And I think it's a great time to be a data principal if this is enacted in the form that it is right now.
Yeah. Arun, see, as you rightly said, Sri Krishna report came out in 2018 and it was tabled in 2019. JPC deliberating it. You expect it to be passed in the budget session. So by the time it's actually rolled out, framed up, and in force, how many period? Is it 1 year, 2 years?
See, your guess is as good as mine on this. The obligation under the budget session is to present the report. Now, whether it will actually be enacted, whether it will actually be passed is a different issue. And unlike many things, this can't be done by ordinance. This has to be done by law. So it will be interesting to see if it's actually going to be passed in that budget session. If it is actually passed in that budget session and the JPC doesn't take more time, then I would think they will give you 1 or 2 years at least before it is, because there's a lot of work to be done under it. You have to create this new data protection authority. That authority has to pass a lot of rules. Those rules have to be examined and everyone has to get comfortable with them and then enact them. But yeah, I mean, I would assume a year or 2 before it actually comes into force, but your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, Chris Gopalakrishnan mentioned, I mean, he was part of the committee which brought this NPD. What is this NPD actually is? I mean, we would like to understand what does the definition of 1 or 2 sentences across.
I can't define it. I think that report tries to do many things. And therefore, I think there is a certain, how do I put this? There's a certain definitional issue there. Among the things which are NPD are things like anonymized personal data. So for instance, if you take personal data and you remove everything that is capable of identifying a natural person, that is called anonymization. So that is still considered to be non-personal data. So that is the highest regulated category. Then there is another category which is machine-to-machine communications or data which never pertain to a natural person. So I would argue all data that is not personal is non-personal, and therefore all data is non-personal fundamentally. But look, the NPD report is more of a policy report. It's not really, I mean, unlike the PDP bill, it doesn't come with a legislation tagged onto it. How that is translated into reality will depend on how legislation comes out of it.
Perfect, perfect. I think there's a couple of questions I think which we will pass it on to you. You can individually respond to them. But thank you, Arun, for the exhaustive explanation and the interesting presentation and discussions we had. To conclude, I sincerely would like to thank Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas for partnering with VDMA this afternoon for this web seminar. I'm extremely thankful for Arun for his wonderful presentation, clearly elucidating the entire, articulating the entire process of the PDP bill across to us. Very insightful, very interesting and insightful. I would also like to thank all of members and industry friends who have participated in large numbers today. I sincerely hope you found these presentations useful and informative. To conclude, friends, the Personal Data Protection Bill right now under consideration by the Joint Parliamentary Committee JPC is big in its sweep, intent and its implications, particularly for future competitiveness of the economy in terms of data being available to train the algorithms that will drive the artificial intelligence, AI, even as individual citizens are protected from harm arising from misuse of the data. We sincerely hope the JPC would do well to hasten slowly and take on board the suggestions of as large a swathe of stakeholders involved as possible. I would now like to conclude with a quote from Bill Gates, Microsoft. He said, historically, privacy was almost implicit because it was hard to find and gather information. But in the digital world, whether it's digital cameras or satellites or just what to click on, we need to have more explicit rules, not just for government, not for private companies, more importantly, the individuals. Thank you all for being with us today in large numbers. I'm very heartful, thankful to Cyril Mangaldas, Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas for partnering with us. Stay well, stay safe, stay connected with VDMA. Have a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.